Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Biennial Coffee Chat. Today, we are here with four panelists, and we are going to be talking about education. We're going to be talking about the impacts of COVID-19 on education and schools across the Americas, and some of the innovations and adaptations that these four leaders have seen to meet these new challenges. If at any point throughout the conversation you have questions and would like to ask them to our panelists, you may put those in the comments on the video, and we'll try and get them at the end of this conversation. And without further ado, I would like to pass it over to Emiliana, who will be the moderator of this conversation. Emiliana Vegas is a senior fellow and co-director of the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institute. And without further ado, I give it to Emiliana.
Thank you, Robin. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And let me introduce first our three fantastic panelists. Daniel de Bonis is the Director of Education Policy at the Lemon Foundation. He has served as Deputy Secretary of Education for the city of Sao Paulo from 2017 to 2020, where he had the chance to lead important education reforms at the local level. He has extensive experience in the public sector in Brazil. Leticia Lai is founding partner and global chief education officer at Camino Education. As an entrepreneur in the education sector, Leticia also founded After School Educación, a socio-emotional program focused on early childhood in Sao Paulo, and Instituto Vila Educación, a nonprofit organization responsible for developing and implementing one of the largest public schools socio-emotional learning programs in Brazil. Finally, my friend Gabriel Sanchezini is an Argentine economist who served as Minister of Education of the province of Buenos Aires between 2017 and 2019. He co-founded two social impact initiatives, EduNexo and CUEPA, that worked on the introduction of technology in education systems. He currently holds the position of Executive Director of the Integral Assessment Unit of Education Quality and Equity of the City of Buenos Aires. Thank you all for agreeing to be here, and thank you, Robin, for bringing us together. So I'm going to start with an opening question for all of you. Each of you comes from a different background as it relates to education, from directing policy, direct classroom engagement, to working with families and students. Could you give us a little context for your work and how the pandemic has influenced it? What are some of the biggest challenges you're currently facing? And what are some of the most creative adaptive strategies that you've seen implemented to address your needs in this very difficult time? So let me start, I think, with Daniel.
Thank you. Thanks, Emiliana. I'd like first to thank the opportunity to be in this panel with these distinguished guests you have here, and thank Robin for the opportunity. I'm here speaking in behalf of the Lemon Foundation. The Lemon Foundation has been working from the last 18 years in Brazil in education policies, trying to promote and improvements in education policies in Brazil, especially regarding learning at the right age, which is really a challenge in Brazil and is a crisis. And it was a learning crisis before the pandemic, as we study the education policies we know very well. Recently, the World Bank, they instituted a proposal of an indicator, of a learning poverty indicator. And according to this index, if you look at the Brazilian students that are 10-year-olds, you have 48% of them that are not reading properly at the age of 10. So this is really, this is pre-pandemic levels. And this is obviously a very severe learning crisis. And the Lemon Foundation has been working very hard to improve the public policies in Brazil. One of the landmarks of this work was the recent approval in 2017 of the Brazilian Curricular National Standards, which is really a reference now for the country as a whole. It didn't exist in the past. And obviously, the pandemic has presented a very big challenge for everyone working with education, working with public policy. And in Brazil, the schools have been closed since March. So it's probably, I would say, the country with the most has been this period of closure has been the longest maybe in Brazil than in probably every other country. I mean, it's a really long time, 5 months without the schools working. And we have to remember also that our school year was from January to December. So the pandemic really interrupted the beginning of the school year. That's different from the countries in the Northern Hemisphere. And so it obviously had a lot of impact. One of the initiatives we took with other organizations that work in Brazil was trying to put together a lot of initiatives that could help the secretaries of education in the municipalities and in the states to cope with this problem, especially with remote learning solutions, trying to provide connectivity to students. And we also have been doing a lot of surveys with the families. And I'll have the opportunity to talk a little about the numbers in the surveys and what they're showing us about how this is going on. But certainly this has been a very big challenge. We're really feeling the stress of the families and the teachers and everyone involved of having this so long a period of closure of schools. And we're really trying to investigate what strategies can be used in order to cope with this, since the pandemic is not under control, which is another very important factor. So when you talk about reopening the schools, we have to take this also into consideration. So this is really obviously has affected a lot of our work, and we can talk a little more about the numbers of the surveys and the strategies we're using as we go on in our conversation.
Thank you, Daniel. And although, as you said, the school year in Brazil has a different schedule than here in the United States, I do think that the two countries are facing very similar challenges, given sort of the way the pandemic has evolved, the way the federal government has, addressed it, and in a context of large countries with a lot of heterogeneity across states, it's very challenging indeed. But let me go now to Leticia first, and with my first question, Leticia.
So thank you everyone again, and thank you for the question. I think that from my experience right now, I'm here representing Camino Education. It's a company I founded a few years ago, thinking about how could we bring more of an active learning to schools. So a lot of the things that we used to talk about, how important it was to work with technology, to be able to do active learning and use a different way of organizing content. When we talk about the pandemic, it was a moment that we were a little bit more ready for. Together with having the platform, I actually opened the school on February 10th. So I'm speaking here from the place of a principal of a newly opened school with 100 new families that got to the school, and then 3 weeks later we had to go to a remote learning. So I think all of the possible challenges, I felt them on my skin. Not only the adaptation that we had to do, but just the courage of jumping into this whole new scenario where teachers, parents, students, everyone was without a reference, right? When we talk about teaching and learning, we usually look at our previous experience. We look at the things that we've seen. And this was just something nobody had seen. Nobody had spent the whole day online. Nobody had thought of ways of implementing engaging learning strategies. And it was very challenging. And at the same time that we I think, just really teachers especially had to overcome a lot of their own beliefs and their own fears. I think that we had a great opportunity of thinking about different ways of learning, and then making new meaning about what school looks like, what learning looks like, for families, what family engagement looks like. It was such a dramatic change for parents that usually kept a distance or just a blind trust into the ways that they learned. So they thought that learning should continue looking like that. And then all of a sudden you're in the classroom, you're sharing, you're understanding. And I think that one of the things that the pandemic brought was that partnership place with parents, right? We talk so much about how important it is to be to have a partnership with parents, to have a dialogue, that the kid is one, that we all work with the same student. And you know, for in our day-to-day life, in the rush, in the just dropping the kid at school and then maybe talking to your teacher once in a while, we weren't doing that. And then right now there was that chance, and how support and partnership looks like was also different. So talking more, bringing in people to support parents at home, to help with behavior, to help with mental health, to help with the knowledge, has been really, really important. So I think I can bring some of that perspective. This is what I've been doing for the past, just like Danielle said, for the past 5 months, we've been closed physically, but working, because this is our school year. We didn't have a break. So we've been working for 5 months on this remote learning, on the new setting of schools, on different schools using different active learning content, on engagement. So I think we've had some insights. A lot of it was really tough. And I think that in education, we're all talking about this, how it was tough and we had to overcome really fast a lot of fears. But there's also been a lot of growth and opportunity. So maybe I can share some of that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leticia. Gabriel, let's hear about what's happening in Buenos Aires and in Argentina more broadly.
Thank you, Emiliana. Thank you, Robin, for getting us together. Thank you for the Biennial of the Americas, and to Daniel and to Leticia for sharing this panel. And building, Emiliana, on what Daniel and Leticia were saying, I see a few changes that are happening in our education systems, not just from what we are doing here in Buenos Aires, as you said, in Argentina, but also talking to parents, to teachers, and to students in the last month that we have been locked down. I will challenge Daniel that our lockdown in Argentina is also very, very long. So we probably are in similar very long lockdowns. But I think some changes are happening regardless of what the governments are doing. And I think these changes might present a good way to accelerate education reform, and a good way to accelerate learning and improving learning in our systems in Latin America, and I'm talking particularly about Argentina. Let me tell you these 4 changes that I see happening, going around schools and looking at other cities. The first one is that technology is here to stay. That's obvious, everybody's saying that, but it was obvious 1-2 years ago. What I think it changed is that we are all much more familiarized with technology. Teachers, principals, policymakers, parents, students, and I think that is giving a big boost to the use of technology in schools. Of course, it has to be the right use. Of course, it's a tool, so it's not any specific solution, but I think it's helping, and I think technology is here to stay, especially in higher school and at the university level, because I know we are more focused here at the elementary and high school level, but it was interesting that in Latin America, universities were not much in technology yet before the pandemic. In Argentina, there are more than 100 universities and university institutes. The majority of them didn't have undergrad digital content. They didn't have a master sometimes online or grad courses online. So I think that is changing fast. And the other side of this technology is here to stay. The statement is that a lot of the platforms that the EdTech community, the startup community has been developing the last years look like they didn't work. We are using Zoom. It wasn't an education tool. We are using Google Classroom, made by Google, not by an education company or an education foundation. So I think it's also interesting to debate why that happened after so much money invested in EdTech and in educational technology, why it looks like schools and universities are using technologies that are more broader and sometimes much easier to use than the other one. The other change that I see happening is the much more aware that we have about inequality. Of course, we knew in Latin America that you see any indicator and you see that there is inequality in our education system as a group of students that don't learn as fast or as much as other groups. I think that is much more evident now at all levels, at the policy making level, politicians, but also at the school level. And I think that, of course, it's a sad reality, but it's positive in terms that if we are more aware, we can work more to focus our policies as civil society work and NGOs in helping the most vulnerable students. Third, as Leticia was saying, the parents' role is changing. It looks like parents are getting education about their children's education. Parents are being educated. We didn't know much as parents about what our students were learning, our children were learning every day. And I think that is giving parents a different role, probably a more demanding role, probably a role closer to school. And I think that's positive, very positive. And the fourth change, and we can expand more during the panel, but the fourth change I see happening fast is all what is related to socioeconomic and 21st century skills, socio-emotional skills, excuse me, 21st century skills that are obvious for us. In this point, we have been discussing about that, Emiliana and myself for many years, and Leticia, Daniel, Robin. I'm sure you guys knew about this for many years. Curiosity is key, critical thinking, team working, lifelong learning. We knew that. However, in Latin America, we didn't have that yet at the curriculum level. We didn't have that yet at the teacher training centers at the universities. Who can discuss now that adapting to change is important, or lifelong learning, or curiosity is important? So I think that change that is happening, regardless of what governments do, is being positive, and I think that is much more evident, and those skills are key to be taught and to be learned by students in our countries, in our cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriel. That's very insightful. I would add that, many of our systems were really not equipped to have students be kind of self-directing their own learning process. And I think one lesson from this is, how can we build that as well, that students take more ownership of their own learning.
Autonomy, no? Autonomy as well. Very good point. I agree.
But Daniel, you mentioned that the Fundación Lehman has done a series of surveys evaluating how parents and teachers and students are experiencing the remote education. Can you expand a little bit on what you're finding in Brazil, and what are some of the insights that you're learning?
Sure. So we've been doing since the month of May a monthly survey on the whole of Brazil with Datafolha, which is one of the main survey companies that works in the country. And what we've been finding, I think the first finding that brings our attention is that the remote solutions that were put in place, they are reaching most of the students, which so it's really some kind of positive note on what we're living. So the latest number we had from the month of July is that 82% of students had access to some kind of remote learning that was provided by the school system. Now, there are many types of tools and resources that are being used. So this includes access by cell phone or computer to some digital platform. This includes classes that are broadcast by TV, the local TV channels. This includes also material that's delivered to the homes of the students in many cases. So the sum of this is that 82% of the students in July were having access to this. What is really of great concern, and this is a point that Gabriel has made, which is really makes perfect sense, which is the inequality, because this number, it's really different in the different regions of Brazil. So if you look at the northern region, for example, it's not 82%, it's more like 60% of the students that are having access. So it's really a huge gap between what you have there and what you have in the southern part of Brazil, when you have something like 95% of students are having access to some kind of remote instruction. So these, of course, these inequalities weren't created by the pandemic, but they are really being deepened by the pandemic and what we're living. So this is really something to pay attention to when we start to reopen, when we start to evaluate what the students have learned. It's very possible that we're going to see the gap between the students widened in this period, and this will require a lot of attention of the schools on this issue. Something else it's very interesting is that, and then I can talk a little about also some of the tools that were put in place. And we at the Lehman Foundation were with other organizations. We helped to produce, now investing in a lot of these solutions. For example, in these video classes that can be broadcast by TV. So we're helping the school systems to providing some of the financing to do this kind of video classes. This was something that was very needed by them. Another opportunity, and I think Gabriel is right in that on the EdTech community, you had really a lot of stuff all over the place. And this is really a test of what works and what doesn't work. Something that we were happy to finance, and I think is really promising, is a tool for communicating with the families via SMS, via messaging apps. And that is based on really behavioral science and nudging the families to involve themselves in the educational process. So this is something we're financing here in the state of São Paulo, and we're seeing promising results in the engagement of the families and the students. So I think this would be interesting. But something that the numbers are also showing, and this is really concerning, is that as this period of school closure it extends in time, we are seeing really growing numbers of anxiety in students. So the parents are reporting 64% reported anxiety and 48% reported irritability, really increasing in this period, which is of course natural. And so this is also a very big concern for us, because school closure also has consequences, including health consequences, because you have to think about mental health. You have to think about cases of abuse or violence that we know that, especially in the context of Latin America and vulnerable communities, this is a reality. And the school, besides being the space of the learning process, it's also a space of guaranteeing children's rights in a lot of ways. So it's very important for us to have this in mind as this process goes on. And regarding learning, finally, we're also seeing that this period is affecting motivation. So there is a growing number of students that are reporting to be less motivated to study. The latest number were 51%. And 67% related that they have difficulties with the study routine at home. So, which is also natural if you think about it, as the process goes longer. Of course, not all parents can be available to help and to be present at all times. So this self-discipline is also a big challenge for the students. And finally, connectivity. Connectivity is also not a new problem, but of course it's very critical at the time we're living. And 36% of the families that were surveyed related that they don't have any broadband access at home. So this is a very big number. And even for the other 64%, the speed is certainly, in most cases, not enough for having a proper synchronous class or something that would provide a better quality of this instruction, of this education. So we're really living now a problem of how to maintain the engagement of these students and these families as this closure goes further. So these would be the main numbers that we got from the surveys.
Thank you, Daniel. That's very, I guess, troubling in general, but also, I guess, very good that you're documenting and also seeing how the trends evolve. It's fascinating. Leticia, in your previous remarks, you mentioned that you had just opened the school and you had to go close, and it's obviously representing huge challenges, but also that there were some insights and some growth that your community has been able to achieve. And I wanted you to highlight on those. What are some good things that have happened or that have come out of this process for you and Camino?
I'm actually going to take a little bit of what Gabriel said and also what Daniel just said. You guys used a very expensive word, which is autonomy. And autonomy is a very, very expensive word for educators. And when we look at it, it has two components. You can look at autonomy as the ways that we know how to act in life, and that changes. And then all of a sudden the pandemic started and everyone was a little bit less autonomous. Like we needed the help to turn in Zoom, we needed help to like plan our lessons differently. Teachers experienced all that frustration, and students feel that all the time, right? When they're learning something new that they might not know yet. But there are two components. One of them is the self-regulation, which is, the motivation that Danielle said that we're having a hard time. The possibility of making choices using critical thinking, but knowing that you're able to do that, knowing how to keep yourself connected to tasks and on track. But there is another component to it, which is the self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is the things that you know that you're capable of doing. And when we talk about learning, and then going back to my school, all of a sudden we moved everyone to a new way of learning, right? There's a new way that teachers, that parents, that you have to relate to it. And to build self-efficacy, we need to actually experiment ourselves as learners in this new thing. I need to know that I'm able to turn on Zoom, and I need to know that I'm able to connect to someone. I need to know that I can learn, that maybe it's going to look a little bit different, but I can do it. And the way that you build self-efficacy and consequentially autonomy is by actually doing engaging learning. And that is something that we know. Like you said, these are not new things. Like Gabriel said wonderfully, these are not new things. We know that we should have a student-centered learning. We should have a curriculum that's relevant, that makes sense, that's competency-based. We should have instruction that is active and that looks at the science of learning and how your brain works to make sure that students are able to engage. We should have participation, we should have voice, we should have the possibility of introducing context. And the thing is that the pandemic, for schools that were already bringing that proposal, there was a lot of opportunity to just show that there is a way of engaging if you're following what pedagogy has studied and come up with research for the past 30 years and applying it. But if you were in a different model, if you were still in a place where you were a teacher and you were sending out the instruction or following the prescribed lesson by lesson and not taking the time to contextualize, to ask students to get voice, to get connection, those students that were maybe already able to do it at school, so they would, just sit down, and maybe you don't know if they're learning, because learning happens inside the individual and in the relationship. What they just started doing was disconnecting. So you could just turn off your screen, turn off your sound, or not show up. And what I've seen, and then I think luckily because our school had just started and already had that backbone thinking about active learning from the start, was that it works. I've seen so much learning once you actually take the time to rebuild that autonomy, rebuild the sense of self-efficacy with everyone, that you make sure that you have a space for student voice, for parent relationship. Like you said, we created different forums for parents. Gabriel, you were right on. I love what you said about parents are taking a new role. Those were all places that we knew were important. And I think that schools and pedagogies that were already looking at that had a less of a struggle making sure that learning was happening and engagement was happening. However, the other side, where if you're not looking at that, if you're not looking at the changes, at the 21st century skills, if you're not looking at the technology that's here to stay, and then what's the ed tech that actually works, or what's the communication channels, but if you're not looking at that with curiosity, we are going to get students that are not engaged. Not only for all the reasons, Danielle already listed a ton of them. It's hard to connect, it's hard to get to people, it's hard to make sure that everyone is there. But if you're also not looking at ways that your brain learns and that you're actually engaging families and students and putting them in the center and making sure that you get all that best research in there, that's going to be even harder. So what I think, and then just I've seen that curve, as Danielle said, we're 5 months, but I've seen the curve where initially you had an access problem, so that autonomy that everybody lost. So teachers immediately went back to putting a blackboard in the back and then started teaching like that. It's a completely different format. And then they were like, well, but my students are not coming. You're like, well, are you asking, do they have a voice? Does it make sense? Did you ask how they're doing? They're in the middle of a pandemic. They're all anxious. They lost their social space. And some teachers didn't do that. But we saw some schools doing it. We saw some schools engaging. I've seen a lot of schools asking and thinking about social emotional skills and 21st century skills and how you can do it. But as we move, we're going to get, as this extends, we're going to all get to the point where we understand the new ways of doing the technical part. But there is a very important shift in the way that pedagogy is understood. If we're talking about just teaching, or if we're talking about learning. And then that's where I see a really big challenge for the next, just even for the next year, whenever we do get out of social isolation and we go back to schools, it's still not going to be exactly the same way. And I think people are going to have to look very hard at that. And we're talking about curriculum, we're talking about assessment, we're talking about instruction, we're talking about relationship. It's a very complex problem that you can't expect that it's all going to change at once. But I've seen it. It's just like you said, I've seen things that were premises that if we didn't have this pandemic, people would not maybe jump right in. But I do think that there is a way that we're going to start seeing this engagement, and it's not just related to the lack of access or to the lack of motivation that the student has, but also for the need of adapting the model that a lot of schools and teachers, especially here in Brazil, still are in.
Actually, that's a really good point. Something we've been thinking a lot, I think collectively, is how may this crisis actually result in the changes to the kind of ways in which classrooms look, because they haven't really changed that much since 2 centuries ago, and what happens in them. So I hope that we can keep some of those lessons as we move forward. I just want to remind our audience who are on Facebook that they can add comments to the video recording with your questions, and we will hopefully address them while we're in this conversation. So thank you. Gabriel, you talked about, and Leticia and Daniel have talked a lot about the sort of learning and what are the skills and how to do it. But we also have talked in the past about how schools are more than a place for learning, especially for some of the most disadvantaged students. So can you talk a little bit about what's your experience with, for example, ensuring that kids who rely on schools as a place where they access nutritional foods, what are some of these other supplemental functions that schools in your jurisdiction have traditionally done, and how has that shifted due to the pandemic?
That's a very, very good point, Emiliana. But before 1 second going to that, I want to comment on 2 things. One that Daniel was saying about, I was surprised to listen to the numbers that he shared with us about how many students are still connected and not connected, and the anxiety about parents, because the numbers are very similar to the polls that we have participated at the national level in Argentina, and also at the city level here in Buenos Aires. Around 12–14% of students or teachers expressed that percentage of students have not been connected the last month. Very similar. Around 60–62% of parents express anxiety and demand a need to be helped during this pandemic and the crisis. Very similar numbers. And we, for the city, we developed some solutions. For example, we started up a call center. More than 100,000 parents called or were called by us in the last 5 months, because we poll parents every 2 weeks since March here at the city, and we realized after the first 2 polls, the first 4 weeks, that there was this anxiety. 62% were expressing, what should I do? What can I do? I need help. And we developed this call center to approach parents. There are around 700,000 parents here at the city of Buenos Aires, and we are still working on that regard. And also going back 1 second to autonomy that Leticia was mentioning, because it's not only key at the student level. I mean, for students, and I think she really addressed that very, very much better than me, with a better English than mine as well. But also I want to talk about autonomy at the school level, because what I have been seeing the last 5 months as well is that we talk, at least my first book in 1999 was about the importance of giving more autonomy to schools, meaning giving more freedom, more empowerment, and trying to the government get out of the school and let the school be the school and do what they think is better for their students. And I think that the pandemic has been accelerating that, for the good reasons, because the government decided to give them more empowerment, or for the bad reasons, because the governments were not able to catch up and help schools, because government didn't know what to do either. This was new for everybody. So for the good or bad reasons, I have been seen going to schools every 2 weeks. Now going to your question, Emiliana, why I'm going to schools every 2 weeks. I have been seeing principals and schools in itself starting, using Zoom, using Google Classroom, printing materials, because they realized that 12–14% of students didn't have any connection, using WhatsApp. So the schools itself, I think, is very positive how the schools have been reacting in a very positive way to this pandemic. And I think that societies are recognizing, at least in Argentina, that schools and teachers are heroes. And they were heroes 1 year ago. But now it's even more evident that they're out there, that they are trying to reach out to students in different ways, trying to keep students connected to different ways. And we recognize, and going back to your question, Emiliana, that schools are much more than just the place where you get knowledge or where you learn. I think that schools are also society organizers. I mean, are where you send your children because you go to work. No, I mean, that's something obvious that we knew that 1 year ago, but I think that now it's much more evident. Schools are the place where a lot of children in our societies are receiving food. I mean, we are giving food every 2 weeks to families through schools in Argentina in general, at the city of Buenos Aires as well, and we are still providing food every 2 weeks to schools. So we open the school for providing food, even though the school in some ways is closed physically, even though it's open, providing knowledge and teachers are at their homes providing knowledge. But we are opening every 2 weeks schools to give food to more than 300,000 students, and it has been growing in the last month. The school as an organizer, as mother, as a father that go to work and take their children to school. The school at the place where you get about, learn about community. Leticia was referring to that as well. Why schools are so important as well? Because our children are not talking to other children, and not, and at the beginning it was even worse because lockdown was everywhere. Now you can go to parks in Buenos Aires, so they can get together at a park during the weekend. But schools are also the place not only where you get your future, your progress, your hopes, your dreams, but also the place where you learn how to live in community. And I think that I see that, at least in Buenos Aires, in these polls that we are doing, that society are recognizing these values that schools provide to the country, to the city, not just the value of knowledge and learning, but all the other values as well.
And maybe I'll revert with a question to you, and then I'll go back to Daniel and Leticia afterwards. But I've been working for most of my career looking at how do we strengthen the teaching profession. And I think one of the possible silver linings of this is that, as you say, that society will value more the work of teachers and the work of schools. Do you think that will translate into better salaries for teachers and better benefits and a more attractive profession that, you know, that is as attractive to like the top university students in engineering as you know, the .com companies are?
That's a fantastic question. I think that I hope that yes, and I tell you why I'm optimistic that might happen, because you know, at least in Buenos Aires in the last month, twice families went out to the street or on their balconies to applaud not only nurses and medical doctors, but teachers. We haven't seen that in Buenos Aires for the last 10, 15 years. So why is that important? Because first, a lot of research shows the correlation between society involved, parents' involvement, and good learning outcomes. Not the correlation, not the causation perhaps, but the correlation you see in the countries that are doing well. Usually society values and put a priority on education. And if that happens, Emiliana, I think that it might happen as well to improve conditions, labor conditions, salaries, because if the voters, if the citizens demand better education and realize now that teachers are heroes, that schools are as organization is a hero as well, let's say, but it's so important, I think that demands will come for politicians to address those issues, or to ministers of education, or to Congress, no? To where you define the budget. So I'm optimistic that if we keep doing this, it will happen. But I think that the governments have a very important role, and you mentioned that before, and Leticia and Daniel as well, to institutionalize many of these changes. Because my concern will be that all now is different, and we're going to a new normal, but also the education system is a very conservative one, and there's a lot of forces that don't want to change. So if we don't push from civil society, from institutions like Brookings or Lehman, and we don't push for that, you know, demand to be institutionalized, it could be better salaries, but could be different curriculums. Could be, as Leticia was saying, different ways to assess, to evaluate, to give accreditation. If we don't make those changes pass into legislation or pass into regulations, we might not be in a new normal. Some people will be in a new normal, the usual ones who have higher incomes and will get more access to technology and all that, but the systems will not change. So I think it's very important that we keep pushing for institutionalizing these changes through legislation and through different regulations. Thank you.
I agree. Thanks so much, Gabriel. Daniel, let me turn to you quickly on this issue and ask if you see some of the same things in Brazil. You know, are families clapping and you know, really highlighting the value of teachers in Brazil? And is that in the current debate? Because another layer is, you know, we have to know we are in a pandemic, and a lot of the financial resources are going, rightly so in some ways, to the healthcare system. Also, in many of our countries, a big discussion about how do you protect businesses that are suffering from the lockdowns, and then, you know, what's the role of protecting education, or maybe even investing more in education in order to reward teachers and their hard work, and really strengthen the possibility that some of these you know, great changes and innovations can be sustained, as Gabriel and Leticia were suggesting.
Perfect. That's a great question. And I think what we're seeing is a really very interesting discussion about the perceptions that people have about the educational process. And I think the pandemic has really brought this to a new level in the discussion in the society. So we also had in Brazil, and I think it was the first time, at least in my memory, that we had applauses for teachers. Everybody was in their balconies and windows applauding teachers on the last July 31st. So that was a very landmark moment for us that work with education. And we've also seen impressive cases everywhere in Brazil, and especially in the poorer places, how people organize themselves. So you see sometimes a very poor home, and then they organize like the study corner of the kid, and they show this is where they're studying, and the videos the students are making. And also of the teachers. It's amazing what they're doing from their homes to provide some kind of resource, some kind of teaching, and sometimes they have to hang the cell phone and on some kind of rope, you know, so and improvise some kind of whiteboard. So it's really, we see all kinds of amazing stuff happening, and I think it's really changing the perception of everyone about what's the education process like, because for many people it's like the school is like this black box where you leave your kid and you pick them later, and you know they're well fed and well taken care of, but have very little idea of what goes on there. And the pandemic changes completely, because in different ways, but everyone has had to engage in some form in what the learning process looks like. And so I think we're really seeing a lot of changes in the perception of people. And I think what is really a challenge is for some people to that at this moment trying to, having the feeling that, wow, this was a lost year, it's so hard. And well, okay, it's hard, but we're seeing so much that's been done, and so many people really engaged in not letting this be interrupted and keep the learning process going. So we really shouldn't have let this feeling be pervasive, I think, because it's not a general feeling, but we're starting to see this more present in the discourse of people. I mean, wow, this is not working, it's a lost year. And it's not a lost year when you have 82% of students engaged in some kind of learning. So we shouldn't have this feeling that affect what we're doing. We really should double our effort and evaluate what we're doing and trying to bring the best of what we can. And I think that we really feel this perceptions changing. We really feel this challenge of engagement. People are really struggling with it, but I think there's a positive outcome of this is this involvement, this personal involvement of everyone in the process. So this could be really something big for us.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think you're right that it's it could be a new, a new win. But I'm also concerned about that 18% that's not engaged in learning, and then how that is not only a problem in Brazil, but we see it in other countries. Kenya recently declared the whole year as a lost year in terms of learning, because the government felt that they had so many students who were not able to access any learning, that it was the inequality of it was so great that they couldn't guarantee that they could move on. So, and they've closed schools through 2021. So there's a lot of concern about the growing gaps in inequality, but we've gotten some really interesting questions from our audience. And I'm going to turn to you, Leticia. We got a question from Jackie, who asks if you can elaborate a little bit on how active learning looks like in the early years. Can you share some good practices for these age groups that worked at your school?
That's a great question. And that was probably the most challenging, which was, getting early childhood on this, especially when you have an active learning proposal where basically you want them hands-on, building things, playing with each other. One of the things that we had to do, Jackie, was kind of go back to what were our basic principles. I agree with Danielle. I think learning is always happening. It just looks differently. It depends on us being able to make good questions about it. First of all, we had to bring in parents and talk to them. We told them, we have some premises. We've never done this before. We're going to try. It's going to be very awkward for a couple weeks, but we'll come back. And then we'll sit together again and think of ways that this makes sense. And so we did. We tried a model that had some synchronous sessions. So a morning meeting where we would help parents and students, as long as they were in front of a device, they would play together and they would get some idea of investigations they would do throughout the day. We planned for each unit a specific investigation that had to do with their home. So we had to change our whole curriculum, but we made the projects that kids could be outside of the screen and they would come back to reconvene with other students and talk about the things that they were doing. With that, we brought parents back in. And I remember there was a mom, her kid was 5, and she turned on her microphone. There were maybe 50 parents in the meeting, and she's like, I can't do it. I can't do it. And she was so upset and in so much pain. And she's like, I can't do it. My life is falling apart. I have to figure out how to work. And now I have to do homeschooling with my kids. And I remember I told her, I was like, breathe. First of all, we are here. This just looks different. We need to come up with a way that I can actually support you, that you don't have to become your kid's teacher. The school is here. We just have to figure out what are these new ways that we can connect. And then I remember I told her, I was like, you can still say that you can't do it. Just add an extra word to it, add yet. Because if we stay like this for 6 months, for a year, for 5 years, we'll have to figure out different ways of learning. And every little effort that you make makes a difference. So for early childhood, we right now have a model that has those get together where teachers can bring out some instruction that the kids can actually play with each other, bring some of the things that are happening in their home. They're doing group investigations. So how school looks like around the world and how we can connect. So they've been actually connecting with other students. And we're also doing a very strong support network for parents. So individually, we'll send them WhatsApp every week with the intention of supporting them and saying, you know, we're here for you. Is there any way that we can work better this week? You're doing the best you can. Don't worry, we'll get there. If we haven't found it yet, it's not a lost year. We're not lost causes. We can actually make it. Just we'll have to keep learning. And then sometimes just understanding that learning doesn't happen in one instance that we're online. Learning is a process like an avalanche. You never know what's the snowflake that's gonna bring down the whole thing, but it does happen at the same time in a lot of places, that this is not a one-shot thing, that this is a process, and the process of trying to keep learning itself will already be very beneficial, especially for early childhood students that are learning what it means to be learning in school. So I think maybe that's one good advice: connect to parents, relevant content that connects to their home, so that they can, you know, we say we're so tight in the screen, but actually if I just do this, I gain this whole world behind me. I can run around, I can pick up a toy, I can come and talk. And sometimes we think we just have to be here. So for early childhood, just remember we have a universe with many dimensions that we can play, and that the richness that comes from their homes, from their backyards, that can also be brought into your curriculum and to the ways that you value your student learning.
That's very inspiring. So thank you, Leticia. I think one thing that I take away from that is, because I think, you know, we talked a lot about parent and student anxiety, but the reality is that educators also are facing with anxiety, and just regular, you know, analysts like me. So knowing that it's a process and we don't have to get it all right first is a great thing to take away from today. So thank you for that. So I've been told that we have to wrap up, but we have a great question from the audience that I'm going to ask all of you as quickly as possible to respond to. So here's the question. The audience member asked, and I'll ask Gabriel first. She's curious, she or he, I don't have their name, sorry. What education innovation has come out of the pandemic that you hope lives on afterwards? Gabi, can you go first?
Yes, of course. Innovation doesn't relate to technology only, so I'm going to talk about more broadly about an innovation. But you know, after so many years, at least in Argentina, I think it's a very good innovation. The higher value that society is putting on schools and teachers, I think that's a great innovation that I hope that we stay and we keep in our societies. A second one related to what you were saying and Leticia were saying is the how teachers could be more familiarized with technology, and that could help eventually to change, you were saying that at the beginning, the way students learn. We have so many good videos now. Why don't we give videos to students at their homes, and then when they come to classroom, we debate, or they learn from each other. They are not looking to the other one, or looking to the blackboard and learning that, as we have been learning the last 2 centuries, as you referred, Emiliana, as well. And the third one, I will say, again, the more active role of parents. When we talk about education reform, and you're an expert in education reform, and have so many books and papers, we usually don't include parents as an actor in education reform. With the government and the unions, that's usually what we do. And then, of course, multilateral, civil society, parents. Why we don't even talk? You look at books about parents involved in education reform. Check it in Google. It's impossible to find a book about that, a paper about that. Some of them, we are working now with you and Rebecca at Brookings, no, in how parents are getting more engaged. But that's an innovation that you're bringing to the debate from Brookings. So the third innovation, I will say, keep parents engaged, from governments, give them the tools to keep engaged, and help them to become and to keep being activists for a better education and for a more resources from politicians and from government to education. And thank you again for, if I don't have a chance, for inviting me to this panel, and thank you for the audience and for this great group of Leticia, Daniel, Emiliana, and Robin.
Thank you, Gabriel. And I would be remiss with my own job if I didn't mention, and thanks for mentioning the work that we're doing on parents, but we're also about to launch a new playbook for ministers of education on how to realize the potential of technology to improve student learning. So we have a big event on September 14th, and I hope that some of our audience members, and of course all of you, can participate. And we're excited that we have really analyzed the evidence and provide, I think, some good insights on how to really take advantage of technology to accelerate learning. Daniel, what would be the 1, 2, 3 max innovations you'd want to keep from this period?
Well, I think maybe instead of picking one technology, maybe I would say that the change of mindset regarding technology is the most important thing, because we know in education there's a lot of taboo and a lot of hard discussion about this. And I'd like to give an example. When I worked at the municipality of São Paulo as deputy secretary, and we implemented a technology curriculum, and we talked to the teachers about their experiences. And one of the teachers told us, and I think this is very interesting, he said, well, I already worked with maker culture and innovation in the classroom, but I felt like an outlaw. I felt like I was clandestine. And now I'm a reference for the others. So I think that's perfect. I mean, that's what we'd like to see. There's a lot of teachers working with innovation and different technologies, different approaches, but let them be the references and inspire the others. And if you can change that mindset, I think that's a very possible positive outcome of what we're living now.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. I think that's very right on the spot. Let's shift mindsets to innovate. Leticia, what would be for you that one or two most important innovations to keep after?
You know, the good thing about going last in the question is that you can say all of the above. And so I absolutely agree with both my panelists' suggestions. And I think that the one that I would like, the innovation that I would like to stick, is the understanding that we're humans, that emotions affect our learning, that it's really important to understand how our brain works, how our mind affects learning, how that actually stays with us, and that we have enough science. We understand about executive function, we understand about interaction, we understand about how humans learn. And I think nothing more glaring than this pandemic could put that on the table for everyone. We all were scared. We were all afraid. We were all afraid to learn. And at the same time that we had all those feelings, we also had a lot of connection. We had compassion. We understood empathy. We saw opportunity. And knowing that that's a part of education, that you can't ignore the fact that we're human beings, because when our environment changes, we need to have those skills, we need to adapt it, we need to make sure that they're being taught, cultivated, and that they have a centerpiece. I think it would be one of the best innovations, kind of segues into all of your work on 21st century skills, on living in a complex world. The world is complex. If somebody had a doubt about it, it just showed us. So I hope that we can all keep that in mind, because it's an important shift. We've seen it, we've all felt it. And I think that for the next years, just bringing forth all of these competencies, it will be a little bit easier because we all share that experience together.
Thank you for that. And I see that leaders today who show that compassion and that understanding of the kind of human aspects of all of us are much more successful, especially in our education and other spheres. So thank you all. It's been an honor. I'm going to hand it over to Robin, who will provide some closing remarks. Thank you, Rob.
Hello, everyone. And I just want to say final remarks that I'm so happy that all of you could join us today. Thank you, Gabrielle, Leticia, Emiliana, and Danielle. This has been an incredible conversation, and I hope our audience members enjoyed it as well. And again, this was our coffee chat. We do these once a month, so tune in next month for our next edition of the Biennial Coffee Chat, bringing you different topics every month. And happy Friday, everyone, and have a great weekend. Goodbye.
Thank you.